In 1955, one company controlled more than half of every car sold in America. It employed hundreds of thousands of people, was the largest corporation on earth, and its CEO once told Congress, "What was good for the country was good for General Motors," and vice versa. 54 years later, that same company filed the fourth largest bankruptcy in U.S. history and had to be bailed out by the U.S. government just to survive. This is the story of how General Motors became an unstoppable American empire, and how bureaucracy, arrogance, and one deadly design flaw brought it to its knees. Chapter 1. The Man Who Bought Everything. General Motors wasn't built by one visionary engineer like Ford. It was built by a dealmaker. William Billy Durant had already made a fortune manufacturing horse-drawn carriages before he took over Buick Motor Company in 1904 and turned it into the best-selling car brand in America. In 1908, the same year Ford launched the Model T, Durant founded General Motors as a holding company. His strategy was simple and aggressive: buy up as many car companies as possible. Within 2 years, GM had acquired Oldsmobile, Cadillac, Oakland, which later became Pontiac, and over 20 other companies. But Durant's buying spree outpaced his cash flow. By 1910, GM was drowning in debt, and a group of bankers forced Durant out of his own company. Undeterred, Durant partnered with race car driver Louis Chevrolet to launch the Chevrolet Motor Company in 1911. It was so successful that by 1916, Durant used Chevrolet's profits to buy enough GM stock to seize back control of the company he'd founded. It didn't last. The post-World War I recession of 1920 crushed GM's finances again, and Durant was forced out for good, this time permanently. He would later go bankrupt and end his career managing a bowling alley in Flint, Michigan, the same city where he'd built his empire. Chapter 2. The Man Who Actually Built the Empire. Enter Alfred P. Sloan. Where Durant was a gambler, Sloan was a systems thinker. Taking over as president in 1923, Sloan organized GM's chaotic collection of brands into a clear hierarchy: Chevrolet for entry-level buyers, Pontiac and Oldsmobile for the middle class, Buick for upper middle, and Cadillac for the wealthy elite. His philosophy was, a car for every purse and purpose. This was a direct attack on Ford's one-size-fits-all Model T strategy. Sloan also introduced the concept of planned obsolescence, releasing new styling and features every year to make older models feel outdated, encouraging repeat purchases. And through GMAC, General Motors Acceptance Corporation, GM pioneered auto financing, letting middle-class Americans buy cars on installment plans instead of paying cash up front. The strategy demolished Ford. By 1931, GM had overtaken Ford as America's best-selling automaker, a position it would hold for the rest of the 20th century. By the 1950s, GM controlled more than 50% of the U.S. auto market, a level of dominance no company has matched since. Chapter 3. The Peak of American Industry. The 1950s and 60s were GM's golden age. The company employed over 600,000 workers in the U.S. alone. It introduced iconic vehicles like the Chevrolet Corvette in 1953 and the Chevrolet Camaro in 1966 to compete directly with Ford's Mustang. In 1955, GM became the first American corporation to earn over $1 billion in a single year. GM's dominance was so complete that in 1953, its CEO Charles Wilson told a Senate committee, in a statement later paraphrased into legend, that he believed what was good for the country and good for General Motors were always the same thing. At the time, it wasn't seen as arrogance, it was seen as simple fact. GM was, in many ways, the physical embodiment of American industrial might. But underneath the record profits, cracks were forming. GM had become so large and so bureaucratic that decision-making slowed to a crawl. Layers of management meant even simple design changes took years to approve. And GM was about to face competitors it had never had to take seriously before. Chapter 4. Foreign Competition and Corporate Arrogance. Throughout the 1970s, fuel-efficient Japanese imports from Toyota and Honda began eating into GM's market share. Especially after the 1973 oil crisis, quadrupled gas prices overnight. American consumers, once loyal to big, powerful V8 engines, suddenly wanted cars that sipped fuel instead of guzzling it. GM's response was sluggish and, in many cases, disastrous. Rather than innovating, GM often tried to cut costs on existing platforms. This corner-cutting culture produced one of the most damaging scandals in automotive history, the Chevrolet Vega and later, the GM ignition switch defect, where a faulty part could shut off power steering, airbags, and brakes while driving. GM knew about the ignition defect for over a decade before recalling 2.6 million vehicles in 2014, a scandal linked to at least 124 deaths and resulting in a $900 million criminal settlement with the Department of Justice. Meanwhile, by the 1980s and 90s, GM's market share had fallen from over 50% to around 30%, then kept sliding. The company that once defined American manufacturing excellence was now synonymous with quality problems, labor disputes, and bloated bureaucracy. Chapter 5: The 2008 Collapse. By the mid-2000s, GM was carrying enormous financial burdens, pension obligations for hundreds of thousands of retirees, expensive union contracts, and a product lineup that still lagged behind Japanese and Korean competitors in quality and efficiency. Then came the 2008 financial crisis. Credit markets froze. Car sales collapsed almost overnight as consumers stopped buying big-ticket items. GM, already financially fragile, couldn't absorb the shock. By late 2008, the company was burning through cash reserves at a terrifying rate and warned it could run out of money within weeks. On June 1, 2009, General Motors filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the fourth largest bankruptcy filing in U.S. history at the time, with over $82 billion in assets. The U.S. government stepped in with a $49.5 billion bailout, taking a 61% ownership stake in the company to keep it alive and protect the millions of jobs tied to it, directly and indirectly. Critics derided the company with the nickname Government Motors. Chapter 6: The Comeback. GM emerged from bankruptcy just 40 days later, remarkably fast for a company of its size, having shed billions in debt, closed underperforming brands like Pontiac, Saturn, and Hummer, and restructured its dealer network. The U.S. Treasury sold off its final shares in GM stock in 2013, officially ending government ownership, though taxpayers ultimately lost around $11.2 billion on the bailout. Since then, GM has repositioned itself around electric vehicles and autonomous driving technology, investing billions into the Chevrolet Bolt, GMC Hummer EV, and its Ultium battery platform, while competing directly with Tesla and legacy rivals in the EV transition. General Motors' story is a warning wrapped inside a triumph. Billy Durant showed that ambition without discipline destroys itself twice. Alfred Sloan showed that structure and strategy can build an empire. And GM's collapse showed that even the most dominant company in the world can be brought down by arrogance, bureaucracy, and a refusal to adapt. Today, GM is a fraction of the cultural force it once was, but it's still fighting, still building, and still trying to prove that what's good for GM can once again be good for the country. Speaking of iconic cars born from this era of American competition, there's one model that came directly out of Ford's response to GM's dominance, and it became one of the most beloved cars ever built, the Ford Mustang. Here's how it happened.